A Call to Arms, December 7th, 1941, a date that will live in infamy. Just as Remember the Alamo had stirred the heart of Texans when they were trying to fight for their freedom against Mexico, and Remember the Maine had sent American soldiers to fight the Spanish. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's infamy speech from the Library of Congress had brought together Americans to try and defeat the enemy. The speech was given on December 8, 1941. He had shocked the nation with the news of the bombing at Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. Other lines from this speech might not be as memorable as the phrase infamy, but that phrase had definitely helped to make this speech significant in American history. Roosevelt's response to this tragic incident was very fitting. I have done a lot of research to make myself a credible source on this topic. I find Roosevelt to be a very powerful speaker, and I enjoy learning about his impact on American history. I also find war to be very intriguing on how it can affect American growth. I am now going to analyze this rhetorical situation based on these elements: the audience, the occasion, the speaker, and the speech. First, I'm going to start with the historical context. On December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese. But right before the bombing, we were still at peace with Japan. The United States had been trying to stay out of the war that was going on over in Europe, Africa, and the Far East. According to Pearl Harbor, Photos and Facts from the infamous World War II attack by Patrick Kiger, 2018, the United States was working on a peace treaty just minutes before the attack. The United States now knew that they could no longer stay out of the war. We had just declared war on the Japanese, and now Germany was declaring war on the United States. President Roosevelt knew that he needed to get Congress, and even the Americans who opposed the war, on his side. His first objective was to try to spur Congress for a declaration of war. His second objective was to unite the American citizens, even those who had previously opposed the war. According to Robert Lehrman in Rhetoric Revisited, FDR's infamy speech 2016, the United States had just been coming out of an era of pacifism, where even Charles Lindbergh had opposed the war against Germany even prior to the attack by Japan. According to the Washington Post 75 years later, Remembering FDR's Day of Infamy by Katie Mettler, FDR's speech must have been very effective because not even an hour after his speech, the Senate and House voted for war, with just one dissenting vote from pacifist Representative Jeanette Rankin of Montana. Throughout his speech, FDR kept a very calm and steady voice with no hint of panic. He used a lot of emotion and tempered some logic in there to try to reach his purpose. George W. Bush had a similar speech after the attack of the September 11, 2001 on the Twin Towers. He also tried to keep a calm composure throughout this tragic accident. He mirrored Roosevelt in saying, "A great people have been moved to defend a great nation." Franklin Roosevelt had served as president for 3 terms, and eventually for a 4th term, and this proves that he is a credible speaker. He helped to get the Americans out of the Depression, and he did this by using the National Recovery Act. This also shows that the American people had really trusted Roosevelt and where he was going with their future. He has good knowledge on what had happened with this attack, and we can tell because during his speech he is not looking down at his paper, but he is making eye contact with the audience, and this helps to give the audience a sense of comfort. Rather than citing that 2,403 people had died and 1,178 people were injured, he says, "I regret to tell you that many American lives have been lost." Robert Lehrman, Rhetoric Revisited, FDR Infamy Speech 2016 states that he didn't state the dead or wounded because he didn't want to distract from the point of his speech. FDR uses a lot of emotion with facts to try and win over the audience. He uses phrases like, "this form of treachery," and "suddenly and deliberately attacked." According to National Archives, FDR's Day of Infamy speech, 2001, FDR had many revisions to try and find his perfect words. He had started out with his first draft, but he didn't like his word choice, so he moved on to his second. He also did not have anybody write the speech for him, so he wrote the speech himself the night before. President Franklin Roosevelt states in his speech that there was no threat or hint of war leading up to the war, and he is trying to build the audience's anger towards Japan. He also is trying to build the audience's anger towards Japan by using repetition. He says, "Yesterday, the Japanese government also launched an attack against Malaya. Last night, Japanese forces attacked Hong Kong. Last night, Japanese forces attacked Guam. Last night, Japanese forces had attacked the Philippine Islands. Last night, Japanese forces attacked Wake Island. And this morning, Japanese forces attacked Midway Island." Roosevelt was repeating himself like a hammer hitting a nail, trying to make sure that he was getting his point across. In his speech, he states that this will not be an easy war, but no matter how long it takes us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. Again, he is trying to prove to his people that he is dedicated to making their future bright. Roosevelt's great execution of this speech to Congress and the United States citizens helped them to understand what had happened and what will happen in the future. President Roosevelt wants to make sure that his audience is on his side, and he does this by showing his confidence in what will be coming next. He also uses a calm demeanor to try and explain the terrible events that have happened, but also repeatedly saying treachery and deceit to try and make sure that the audience is also angry with Japan. This day was described as one going down in infamy by FDR. It forced us into an unwanted war and forced us to unite as a country. Through this hardship came a new world leader and a people willing to defend the rights of all people. And this all started with a date that will live in infamy.